Hello, everyone. Welcome to a natural sciences classroom with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. My name is Miranda. I am here with my coworkers and teammates from special events at the museum, R and Carrie, and we are going to talk about creatures of the deep. It's a really cool topic, and I hope you guys are all excited to learn with us. So as we get started, I'm going to tell you about what we're going to talk about today. So first, we're going to start out with what exactly is the deep? What does that mean? And then we're going to learn how we explore it and how we learn about it, what adaptations animals have in order to survive these crazy conditions of the deep. And then we are going to meet a few deep sea critters and learn more about them with Carrie. So as we get started, I want to know if you know the answer to this question. So what percentage of the Earth is covered by oceans? Is it 30%? Is it 50%, 70%, or 90%? What percentage of the Earth is covered by oceans? Just drop your answer in the chat. You can put the percentage, or you can drop A, B, C, or D. And as I'm waiting for those answers, I am going to read off some of your favorite ocean animals. So let's see, Leslie Ann, their favorite animals are dolphins and squid. Very cool. You know, I think dolphins probably like to eat squid too. Hugo's favorite sea creature is the great white shark. Let's see. Ooh, Carrie likes the giant squid. Ashley likes the stingray and the tiger shark. Ooh, and megalodon from Jay. Luckily, megalodon isn't swimming the oceans with us. All right, so we have a couple of answers. And so we have our guesses are C or D. Those are very good answers. And the correct answer is C. 70% of the Earth is covered by oceans. And that's really important too, because we get about 50% of our oxygen from the oceans, and we'll learn about that as we move on and talk about the zones in the oceans. All right, so before I talk about zones, I'm going to define these terms really quick. So I'm going to use the word pelagic a lot, which just means open ocean. When we're talking about the sea floor or relating to the bottom of the ocean, that word is benthic, but you're going to see some benthic animals, but we're talking pelagic. So here are the different zones. You can see we have the 5 major zones here, and we're going to go a little bit more into those next. So first, we're starting off with the epipelagic zone, or the sunlight zone. So this is the area of the ocean where the sunlight penetrates through. So we're getting lots of photosynthesis, right? So plant life, so algae and other kinds of plants are living in this zone. Algae provides so much food, and again, all that oxygen. And this zone stretches down to about 200 meters, which is just over the length of 2 football fields. And these are the some of the where most of the iconic ocean animals are living. So shark, a lot of fish, tuna, seals, sea lions, sea turtles, these things that you're really familiar with, dolphins, things like that. And next, we're moving down to the mesopelagic zone, or the twilight zone. So this is where it's getting a little bit darker. Not a lot of sunlight is reaching here. A lot of these animals that live in this zone at nighttime will move up into the epipelagic zone to feed. But you're starting to get a few more of these kind of weird looking adaptations where you're getting kind of clear bodies. And this zone is stretching down about 1,000 feet. This zone is much bigger than the epipelagic zone. And then we're down into the bathypelagic zone, or the midnight zone. So it is pitch black down here. There is no plant life at all because there's no light reaching it. You're getting iconic animals like the giant squid, the Dumbo octopus. This image that you see is the vampire squid, which is a very cool animal. This is the biggest zone. This is actually the largest ecosystem on Earth. And it's a crazy ecosystem. And we're going to learn about some really cool animals that live in this complete darkness for 24 hours a day, and some cool adaptations that they have. All right. Deeper still is the abyssopelagic zone, or the abyss. And it's called that because very, very few animals or any living thing can live in this zone. It is complete darkness. It is freezing cold in almost all the places down here. And the pressure is immense. It is a lot of pressure on these animals. And so this is about 4,000 meters down to the bottom of the ocean, which is about 6,000 meters in most places. And a really cool fact about this zone is that more people have actually traveled to space than they have the abyss of the ocean, which is amazing, right? And then we have a special zone called the Hadal zone. And this only exists in special places in the ocean called ocean trenches. So below the abyss, if you find a big crevice in the earth, that you're traveling into the Hadal zone. And these are the deepest places on Earth. The deepest place that we know of is called Challenger Deep, and it's around 11,000 meters down. And that is deeper than Mount Everest is tall. So Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world. And this trench is even deeper. All right, and we have actually a few people who have gone down there. We'll talk about them in a little bit. Yeah, I see some great questions coming in. So we're going to learn about how we study these different zones. And we're going to start off with one that might not be the most exciting, but it's very important. And that's by using instrumentation. So these are kind of permanent structures that are constantly reading the profiles of the ocean. So you're getting temperature and oxygen saturation and things like that, which is really important for us to understand what is actually going on in the water. And so these are a few different types. We have things like profiling buoys, which is the top right one there, which is a buoy that has all these instruments connected to it. And then scientists can read what those measurements are. You have instrumented moorings, which are these other things where you have the sensors floating on top, and then you have buoys and something holding things to the very bottom of the ocean. All right, let's move on to the next one. So these are manned submersibles. So these are awesome, really cool vehicles. The first one to go deep sea diving with people inside was the Alvin, and that is in the top left, and that launched in 1964. And Alvin actually has made more than 4,400 dives, including exploring the wreck of the Titanic, which is super cool. And this vehicle is owned by the US Navy. All right, and we also have some more modern ones that I'm showing you here. James Cameron is the man you see here. He is a movie producer with some familiar films that you may know of. And he dove down to the deepest part, the deepest trench, the Challenger Deep, in this to record a documentary. We have a lot of different ones, including that bottom left one holds the record for the deepest dive. And that was from Victor Vescavo. And he dove down in this Triton 36,000 and reached a depth of 10,925 meters, which is the current record for the deepest dive from a human, which is amazing. So he went to the very bottom of Challenger Deep. And something important to mention about his dive is that when he was down there at the deepest point in the planet, he said that he came across a plastic bag and candy wrappers, which is really amazing, which is why we say, make sure you're disposing of your garbage in a proper way, because even at the deepest point in the earth, we're finding evidence of humans not disposing of plastic, and lots of animals down there are eating that as well. And you'll learn more about that later. All right, and we have a quick video here, and Skelly is behind the scenes. He's going to fast forward for us. And this is a manned submersible, and it's going to show you how dark it's getting. And so they're kind of in this bubble and they're going down deep. And so you see here, they're in the epipelagic where it's nice and sunny and bright and beautiful clear water. And they're just going to keep going down, and it's just going to get darker and darker. And so you can see it is pretty dark down there. So they have no light penetrating to the water. And they are just exploring the bottom of the ocean right there, which is really fun. I'm just going to show you kind of some of the stuff that they're seeing. A lot of these submersibles have arms that are robotic, can reach out and take samples and bring them back up. All right, so we're going to move on and talk about the last way people are exploring, and that's by robotic voyagers. So these are either autonomous, which means they kind of drive themselves around, or they are remote controlled by people standing on a ship, and they're going down deeper where it's a little bit safer for the people to explore these areas. And these can also take samples. You see in that bottom photo there, those little kind of clear containers. So a lot of these have vacuums or little robotic arms that can grip things and pull them in and put them in sample cups and bring them back to the scientists who are waiting on the ship. And again, we have another video that Skelly is going to pull up. And this is a Chinese robotic vehicle that they launched, and it's you're gonna see some of the really cool arms and collection apparatus that they have on here. Sorry about that. And you see it collecting with vacuums and hooks, and it's very, very cool. And of course, this is much safer because people are not having to dive down to these extreme pressures, which we'll learn about more. And of course, we don't encourage littering, even if you are putting your flag on the bottom of the ocean. All right. Now I'm going to pass it over to R, and they are going to tell you more about these amazing and crazy and intense conditions that we see at these deeper zones, and about some of the amazing animals that live there and how they have adapted to do it.
Right. So thank you, Miranda. So let's imagine you're at the bottom of the ocean. What is it like down there? What are these fish and animals experiencing? So some of the conditions of the deep sea, for every 10 meters that you go down, the pressure increases by 1 atmosphere. So here on the surface, gravity exerts about 14.7 pounds per square inch, or PSI. At the Marianas Trench, so one of those extra deep places at the bottom of the ocean, it's about 1,071 atmospheres of pressure on you. That's over 15,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. So imagine what you're experiencing here times about 1,000. And that's kind of crazy, at least for me, at least. Another thing that you have to deal with down at the bottom is that there's no sunlight. So Miranda mentioned some of this. So sunlight only goes down to about 1,000 meters. That means that anything below that, there's no sunlight for photosynthesis. So there's very few nutrients. There's no plants found down there. And there's also no heat. So there's no radiant sunlight. There's nothing really to keep them warm. There's a few places where in the Earth's crust, there are little volcanoes peeking up called hydrothermal vents. And that's some place you can get heat, but those aren't found everywhere. So the majority of the ocean is extremely, extremely cold. So how do animals adapt to all these conditions? One of the adaptations to pressure is they actually have no swim bladders. So those are open cavities, open spaces in the fish that usually help them float. They're little air pockets. They can adjust them as they're going down or going up in the water. But down here with this extreme pressure, they'll actually get crushed, kind of like a soda can almost. So they got rid of all of those open cavities, and they kind of maintain neutral buoyancy. They let the water do the work for them. Another way that they adapt is they don't have a lot of bones and hard structures in the fish. So they're kind of soft, they're squishy. Again, that pressure is doing the work for them. So they might be a little bit slimy or even kind of blobby. So one of the deep sea creatures that has kind of gained some prominence is this blobfish. So the picture on the top there on the left is what we think of when we see it. When you Google blobfish, this is going to be the first thing that comes up. This kind of gross, nasty, squishy creature. But actually at depth, so in their natural habitat, they're being held together by this pressure and they look more like a normal fish. It's just when they're brought up to the surface, that environment changes and those pressures aren't there, so their whole body kind of collapses and squishes down. So another thing that they have to deal with is low light. So how do they see? Some species have developed these super huge eyes. So the deep sea telescope fish, which is seen here, has these huge tubular eyes, hence the name telescope fish. They actually account for 4% of their body length. In comparison to humans, less than 1% of our body length are eyes. So 0.01% of our body length are eyes. Imagine if 4% of us were just eyes. That's crazy to me. So some creatures have developed these huge eyes for better eyesight. Another way that they adapt is by looking upwards towards the light. So this barrelfish has these specialized eyes that can rotate within their skull. So when they're looking forward, they're kind of just swimming around looking for stuff. But when they're hunting and they're looking for things to eat, they actually direct their eyes upwards, look through their clear head, and they look for the shadows of fish swimming above. So instead of, they have these giant eyes, but instead of just relying on that, they're able to look up and find the shadows and adapt that way. So they're using that little bit of sunlight that comes through to their advantage. Another way is another type of specialized eyesight is this dragonfish. So a lot of these fish down here, blue light is the light that can penetrate through the water the most. So anything that you'll see down there bioluminescing or any colors tend to be blue. Red is the first light filter, the first light that filters the fastest. So red doesn't really come down to the bottom of the ocean. You're not going to see a lot of red things unless you're a dragonfish. So they are the only type of fish to be able to see and produce red light. So this is a way that they're kind of sneaking up on their prey. They're able to see, they're able to illuminate and have these lights that are red. None of the other fish can see them, so they can kind of sneak up and have that extra advantage on their prey. Some other species have just decided to get rid of eyes altogether. It's too dark, they can't see anything. They're just like, you know what, we don't need them, we'll find other ways to live down here. One of those species is the tripod spiderfish. So it stands on the ocean floor, it uses its long pectoral fins, and it just sort of stands in the current and waits for food to come nearby it. So it uses its other fins. So it has its pelvic and caudal fins, those fins on the bottom to stand, but it uses its pectoral fins, the fins on the side, to kind of use it as sensors in the water above it and wait for fish to come by. And then it turns its head and bites them that way. So it doesn't really need to swim, doesn't need to travel. It just kind of lets the water do the work for it. So other ways that they can sense in the dark is sharks and rays have these special things called the ampullae of Lorenzini. These are little sensors, little pores all along their body that detect electrical fields. So all living animals produce electrical current. That's how our muscles move. That's how our brain sends signals down to the rest of our body. It's electrical current. Sharks and rays are able to detect that. So this Greenland shark here on the right, it oftentimes has eye parasites. So these little copepods, little worm-like creatures, will attach to their eyes, and so they're unable to see for the majority of their life. So they're blinded, they can't see, so they rely on these electrical currents to sense their world around them. The sofa shark in the middle top image, you can see that there's a little light sticking out from one of the submersibles that Miranda mentioned. These sharks are able to sense the electricity of the submersibles, and actually that's how they can kind of get footage of some of these animals that live in the deep sea, because most of the time they don't really have any interest in these weird man-made structures. They're just swimming around minding their business, but they're able to sense like, wow, that's a lot of electricity coming from this one thing. Let me go see what's happening. And that's how they get some of these footage of these creatures that we would never get the chance to see. They're attracted and drawn in by the electricity. Similarly, the frilled shark uses its open mouth as kind of a satellite to help detect fish and the movements in the ocean around it. And it also uses its teeth. Its teeth are very, very, very white. So in the dark, if there's perchance some light, it's able to use that contrast of the darkness and the white to be able to draw fish in. So that's sort of another way that even if you can't see super well, it's a way that you'll be able to notice that shark. And if you're a fish, unfortunately, you're probably going to be its dinner. So, how do you adapt to these creatures that are able to see in this darkness? So one way is to actually use color. So I mentioned that light doesn't really go all the way down into the darkness. And some fish are able to use this for their advantage. They actually produce black pigment and they blend in further into the darkness. So the devil anglerfish, which you can see in the smallest middle top picture, is solid black. There is not an ounce of other pigment in its body except for black. Similarly, the black dragonfish is the same one that's able to produce and see red light, is solid black. This is a way it can blend into the darkness. Nothing's gonna see it coming, and even its teeth are transparent. So you might think, like with the frilled shark, its teeth are white, it's gonna stand out. Even if they're all black, they're still gonna be seen. But you'd be wrong because their teeth are transparent. So even then, they blend in completely. You would never see it coming. And other creatures have that similar mentality of, you know what, I'm just going to blend into my environment. But instead of producing pigment, they just don't have any at all. They're transparent. They are totally clear. So creatures like the glass octopus, the sea pig, which is a type of deep sea cucumber, it just crawls along the bottom looking for decaying things. And the sea walnut, also called the warty comb jellyfish, which you can see on the bottom right. These creatures are totally transparent. They don't produce any pigment. Part of that is because there is no sunlight. They don't have the light to be able to make that pigment like we do here on the surface. And another thing is just they don't need it. They're going to blend in completely, or they're going to be totally see-through. So we've covered light. We've covered pressure, but what about the cold? I mentioned it's freezing down there. There's very little heat except for those hydrothermal vents. So how do these animals not freeze to death? So one of the ways they adapt to this is by size. So you have all this pressure coming down on you. You can't really move super fast through that water. It's going to use up a lot of energy. And so when you do get that energy in, when you are able to eat something, you're not putting it towards movement. You're going to stay put, you're going to move really slow. So all that energy you're consuming can actually go towards cell growth. So there's this condition called deep sea gigantism, which means that a lot of creatures that live at these depths are able to grow to these massive, massive sizes. So you might have heard of the giant squid. It's one of the largest creatures that we know of. This giant squid, hence its name giant, grows to be it's larger than a school bus. Similarly, giant sea spiders, as the name might suggest, they grow to huge sizes as well. Their leg span can be over 3 feet long. So imagine the spiders you've seen here on the surface. Well, they can grow to be 3 times that down in the deep sea. They also develop these large, loose proteins that are able to keep from freezing. It's much harder to freeze something that's really, really big than it is to freeze something that's really, really small. So these proteins are able to stay flexible like the rest of their bodies. They're able to stay flexible and soft and loose so they don't freeze and remain solid. Another way that they adapt, I mentioned those hydrothermal vents. So these are spots in the surface of the Earth where magma and other steam and heat is coming through, essentially underwater volcanoes. And some animals have adapted to live in this condition. So they said, you know what, it is just too cold everywhere else. I'm going to find these spots and I'm going to live in these super, super hot conditions. So they went from one extreme to another. Things like the vent octopus, giant tube worms, and even yeti crabs are able to survive in these really harsh, acidic, really high temperature environments instead of surviving in the cold. So not only are they adapted to the pressure, not only are they adapted to no light, they're able to survive in these super, super hot environments, which you may not think would even exist in the ocean, but they're able to go from one extreme to another and survive almost perfectly. They're perfectly adapted for their environments. And now Carrie, another one of my colleagues, is going to take over and talk about a little bit more about those adaptations and how they survive in their environments.
All right. So I'm Carrie, and so far we have learned what the deep sea is, how we explore it, some really amazing adaptations animals have in order to survive these extreme conditions. Now we are going to meet a few deep sea critters. So who lives down there? We've met a few, but let's meet a few more. So there are fish down there. So the first fish I'm going to talk about is the lanternfish in the top left. So the lanternfish, they are 65% of deep sea fish biomass. That means there are a lot of lanternfish out there. And there's a lot of different kinds. There's 246 different species. So these little fishies are found in the oceans worldwide. They're called lanternfish because they use bioluminescence, and they eat zooplankton. And what they do is, remember the zones from the beginning? They stay down in the bathypelagic zone during the day where they're eating their zooplankton, but at night they move up to the epipelagic zone. And scientists aren't quite sure why. Either they're following the zooplankton so they can keep eating at night too, or they're going up into the epipelagic zone to evade predation so they don't get eaten by somebody else. And I think that as we go through some of these animals, I want you to really notice the food web, because when you're taking plants out of the equation, everybody becomes a predator. So now let's talk about the goblin shark, this incredible animal you see on the lower left. So goblin sharks are living fossils, and they can get pretty big. Normally they're about 10 to 13 feet, but they can get up to 20 feet long. So they are benthopelagic, which means they hang out kind of right at the ocean floor. And they stay pretty deep, around 330 feet, but they can dive down to 4,270 feet. So that's about 1,300 meters for short periods of time. So that's pretty deep. So they're a sluggish hunter. They eat fish, cephalopods, and crustaceans. Cephalopods are squids, octopus, and they're also the chambered nautiluses. But when we're talking about deep sea, those aren't going to come up. So one really cool adaptation that the goblin shark has is, you see those kind of creepy looking jaws? Those jaws protrude out to grab their prey. And they find their prey using the ampullae of Lorenzini, which are all up and down that crazy long snout. So goblin sharks can protrude their jaws to the end of that snout, if you can visualize that. And so as they grow older and they get mature, the snout doesn't grow. The shark's body grows. So proportionally, younger sharks will look like they have a longer protrusion than the older sharks. So if you registered for the program, you would have gotten resources for a goblin shark mask and a coloring page. And we also put that information into the YouTube chat, so you can explore some more with goblin sharks. The next
Carrie,
fish.
before you move on, we had some questions about the goblin shark. You mentioned that it was a living fossil. What exactly does that mean?
It means that it has been around for hundreds of millions of years, and it's the only extant shark in its lineage. So they evolved many hundreds of million, like 200 and some million years ago. All the other sharks that were in that lineage went extinct, but the goblin shark survived. So they've been around for a long time, which is why they're a living fossil.
Okay. And Paige wanted to know, has anyone gone down there and seen the goblin shark in person?
That is a great question. So that might be something that we can look up to see if we've gotten any of that footage in the submersibles. I think, I'm not sure but mostly, and what you're going to find with most of these animals, we have gotten footage, we've talked about this, Miranda talked about humans going down in the submersibles, also the unmanned submersibles we're sending down to take video footage. So some of these things we see, but if you can imagine, you're sending a submersible down there, it's battery operated, the camera is only going to work for a certain period of time. Your likelihood of getting footage is fairly low. So all of these animals we're talking about today we know very little about their life history, only what we can glimpse during these forays into this really extreme habitat. Most specimens we find are either they're washed up dead or they're caught in fishing nets. So there's different, so mostly we're not seeing them alive behaving as they would in the wild. Goblin sharks in particular are global in their distribution. We don't think that their populations are very high, but they are listed as least concern because they're not caught very often. But they are caught with some regularity in deep sea fishing. But they think that their populations are stable. So.
And Hugo was wondering what that big nose was for. You mentioned that it had the ampullae.
It has ampullae of Lorenzini are all up and down that big nose. And so one thing I really want to point out, and I know that R touched on this, there is little to no light. So when you are hunting, and there's no plants, so you're not an herbivore, so you have to be a hunter or a scavenger. And so in order to find your food, you have to come up with, evolutionarily come up with a different method of finding your food. And so the goblin shark's method is those ampullae of Lorenzini, sensing those electric currents. So they're very sluggish, they're very slow. They kind of just sit there. A little fishy swims by or a squid, that electrical field stimulates the ampullae of Lorenzini and these huge jaws come out and grab it. So all of these animals have these adaptations. And as we go down to talk about a couple other fish that I want to talk about, they have different feeding strategies to deal with this deep, deep darkness. Which is a great lead into the fan-fin sea devil. And so the fan-fin sea devil is a species of deep sea anglerfish. And I know probably most of us are familiar with anglerfish, but maybe you didn't know that they live all over the ocean. Some species are deep sea residents, about 168, but there are shallow anglerfish as well. But one thing they all have in common, they are all predatory. So they're all out there hunting. One of the adaptations that these deep sea fish, a lot of them have, and you'll notice why they all look kind of creepy and scary, right? They have these huge mouths. That's because when you are in deep, dark, cold water, you're probably not moving very quickly. So you're not like a shark up in the epipelagic zone, darting around, hunting fish and eating them. You're sitting there waiting for some unlucky fish to swim by. And when they do, you want to make sure that you capture it. So you have these big, huge teeth, these big, huge mouths, so you don't miss when it comes time to grab that fishy prey. So they want to take advantage of any meal that swims by. So now, so we're going to show this video of this fan-fin sea devil. I also would kudos to the scientists who are naming all of these animals because they are just wonderful. So the fanfish sea devil is one of the really cool adaptations they have for reproduction is that when you're in the deep, you're in the dark, it may not be very easy for males and females to find each other. And so here we are, this is showing right now, the male fish actually attaches himself to the female. They actually fuse together, so he stays with her all the time. So they're able to reproduce, but then she also provides food for him. So he survives and they stay together the rest of their lives. And so also the anglerfish has that angle, that lure, which attracts fish to it and you can see in this video, this fish is not doing a whole lot of swimming. She's floating, she's spinning, she's drifting, just waiting for somebody to swim by and be attracted to her lure. All right, the last fish I want to talk about is the Mariana snailfish. So R talked about the blobfish. A Mariana snailfish is very similar. It looks kind of like a tadpole. And these are the deepest known fish that we know of. So they live at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. And so that is about 8 kilometers, 5 miles down. So deep. So they have different adaptations. As you can see in this picture, they have these little whiskers. So they are benthic, they kind of, or benthipelagic. So they swim above the surface and they use those little whiskers to feel for prey. And they also, I think if we go to the next slide, we can see their skull. And this is really cool. I don't know, Skelly, if you can use your mouse to show. They have 2 sets of jaws. So the first set of sharp teeth grabs their prey, and the second set makes sure it can't get away. Because again, we need the fish need to expend as little energy as possible to capture those meals. All right, so Mariana snailfish eat the next animal I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, and Zeus from YouTube was wondering if that snailfish was somehow related to an axolotl because it looks really similar.
Oh, that is a great question because it does look kind of, these blobby looking fish do look kind of like amphibians, don't they? But it is not. An axolotl is a salamander, and this is a fish. It's a bony fish that lives down in there. So not very closely related. So the next animal I want to talk about is this super fun one called, again, a great name, a super giant amphipod. So all these amphipods are also living at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, so the deepest depths. And the Mariana snailfish eats the amphipods. So there's also smaller amphipods that are scavengers. So an animal dies or a little, your snailfish leaves a scrap. The little smaller scavenger amphipods will eat that. Something so cool about the scavenger amphipods, they actually can eat driftwood, which I think is amazing. So we are in about the furthest you can get from a forest on our planet down in the Mariana Trench. Somehow driftwood still makes its way down there. And these amphipods have actually evolved to be able to digest that wood, which is pretty cool. And another crustacean that lives down at depth is a giant isopod. So giant isopods, if you've ever been to Bug Fest at the museum, you'll see our specimen that is from our research collection. And it's big. And it is an isopod, which is like a potato bug or a pill bug. We all have different names for them. But they are a marine species that lives down at depth. So they're very cool. All right. Now I'm going to talk about a certain cnidarian. Cnidarians are the jellyfish, of course. But there's one called deep staria, which is my favorite. And we have a video to show of a deep staria with something very special inside of it. So you can see this is a jellyfish, and we can maybe fast forward a little bit so that we can see. Do you see the red? There's something red in the jellyfish. What is this red thing? Does anybody have a guess? If you have a guess, put it in the chat. I'll give you a couple seconds. We'll watch this before I tell you what it is. Do we have any? Let me know if we have any guesses, Skelly. It's a different kind of animal.
I think we have no idea what it is.
No idea what it is. It's kind of hard to tell. I think towards the end of the video, you can get a better look at it. but it is it's called an isopod, like the giant isopod. It's called a resident isopod, and it lives within this deep staria. So the deep staria, of course, is a filter feeder. Little, particles are down in the water. It's filter feeding, and the isopod gets to benefit from that. And I'm not sure if scientists know if the deep staria benefits from having a pet isopod, but the isopod definitely. Oh, there's a great view of it. You can see it looks like a potato bug, doesn't it? It's just this beautiful
Yeah,
red
we
color.
had some
How
guesses
cool
that
is
maybe it was
that?
a brain or a heart, but once you get up close, you can really tell.
Yeah. So this is an example, of course, of symbiosis. So two animals of different species living together, having a relationship. So very cool. All right. Now the next kinds of animals I want to talk about are mollusks. So down in the deep, we have, as I said in the chat earlier, my favorite deep sea animal, the giant squid. Giant squids have fascinated me since I was a little kid. They are amazing. So big, they can get up to 43 feet. Those are females. Females get bigger than males. So they eat deep sea fish and other species of squid, and are just a super neat and amazing animal. We also have the Dumbo octopus, one of the world's cutest octopuses. These little guys use their arms to move along the ocean floor, and they're looking for polychaete worms or pelagic copepods, isopods, and amphipods, so all those little crustaceans. And what they do is when they find something, they pounce on it and swallow it whole. So pretty adorable. But the most numerous mollusk down there at deep are the bivalves. So like this long neck clam. So they are benthic. So they are actually down in the mud and the muck down at the bottom and filter feeding. But there are some predatory bivalves as well. So very cool. So the last kind of mammal or animal I want to talk about are the mammals. So do we think mammals live down at depth? No, of course, all mammals need to breathe, and that's real far to hang out forever. But there are some mammals that visit the deep. And so the first one I want to talk about is the elephant seal. The southern elephant seals are the top 3 deepest diving mammals in the world. So the first 2 are cetaceans, whales. The second is a pinniped, or the third is a pinniped. They can dive down 6,998 feet, and they are going down there to get fish and squid. So southern elephant seals are the best performing seal in the world, and they are better than all but 2 of the cetaceans. So females will dive down to the pelagic zones, but males will go all the way down through pelagic to benthic. So they go down to the ocean floor to get these fish and squid. So pretty impressive seals. The next deepest diver is the sperm whale at 7,382 feet. So they have some really impressive adaptations in order to go so deep. They have a flexible rib cage, which allows their lungs to collapse in order to deal with this incredible pressure that exists down at deep. They have the longest intestinal system in the world. It's 300 meters or 984 feet. They will eat the giant squid, but mostly they eat medium-sized squid. So they are squid eaters. So one fun fact is that this squid have beaks, just like octopuses, and they are undigestible. So usually the whales will barf them up, but sometimes they stay. They have 4 chambered stomachs, like a cow. And one whale was found with 18,000 squid beaks in the second of its 4 stomach chambers. He was eating a lot of squids. They are big animals, so I guess it takes a lot of squid to sustain a sperm whale. And they can dive up to 120 minutes. That's 2 hours. Just imagine holding your breath that long. But it's a long way down that far. All right. And our
Carrie, we were
champ,
wondering why the sperm whale has such an enormous blockhead.
what a great question. So the sperm whale, so I think that that maybe we can look that up. And I know that it's, they were during whaling, they were one, so back up real quick. I'm not going to say this is why sperm whales, but I'm going to tell you a fact about a lot of these animals that are at depth, is they have a very oily substance in them, and it's called TMAO. And that's what gives fish their fishy odor. And so something like the Mariana snailfish that it has more than any other fish that they've ever found. And what that does is so normally, and I'm not saying this about the sperm whale, but I am saying it about the snailfish because I know that that's a fact. What this oil, so when you're going at depth, the water is what's crushing you, right? And so at the pressure. And so what this substance does is it binds to the water and allows that animal to not get crushed. And I know that sperm whales are very oily whales. I'm not saying I'm 100% sure that that's why that's happening, but maybe, if we can do a little research to see if that has to do with it, because whale oil, but also the amphipods, they are full of that oily substance as well. Like what the amphipod, it looks kind of like a shrimp, and you're like, oh, you can eat shrimp, right? You can't eat an amphipod because there's nothing really there to eat. They're not swimming like a shrimp. They're not all muscle. It's that oily substance.
Yeah, and a lot of these questions we don't really know the answers to yet, and scientists are still studying. One reason that something like a sperm whale might have a really big head is because it has a big brain, because they're social creatures, and you need a big brain for navigating socialization.
Yes, and that is a really good point, Skelly. Isn't science amazing? There are so many questions, and we don't have the answers to everything, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, that's a great question, Paige. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a few of us behind the scenes here, and we've all been looking. And so lots of whales and other animals use something called echolocation to communicate, which is, kind of the point that Carrie and Skelly were talking about. And so all of that fatty tissue in the whale's head may help with echolocation, and also maybe buoyancy and things like that. But again, someone mentioned earlier in the chat that more than 80% of the world's oceans are unexplored by humans. And so we are learning so much every single day. And it's very hard to study an animal that is so huge. We can't put them in a container and observe them.
Absolutely. And echo, that's a really great bridge, because to talk about the Cuvier's beaked whale, because echolocation is really important for them to find their prey. So, and also we talked about with the anglerfish, where the males fuse to the females because it's so hard to find each other in the ocean. Also, we all know whales communicate, right, with each other, and that is just another evolutionary adaptation in order to find each other in this big, huge, vast ecosystem. So Cuvier's beaked whale, they hold the world record for the deepest diving mammal, 9,816 feet. They can dive up to 222 minutes. I mean, like 100 minutes more than the sperm whale. So I did want to point out that one record of 222 minutes is an extraordinary length, but it was not normal. That whale, they thought, dove so long because it was trying to escape some military sonar. And that is the absolute limit of how far and how long it could go down there. So usually their dives are not going to be that long. So 92% of its diet, and they do use the echolocation to find their prey. It's mostly squid, 92% squid. So I think we're seeing a theme here. Squid are very popular in the deep ocean. But they'll eat crustaceans and fish too. And one fun fact I found is that one specimen was found to have eaten in one trip, 200 squids, 5 fish, and 1 very deep sea shrimp. So a little, I think that one message, if we can talk about that, is that food's hard to find and you have to be opportunistic. So you'll find a lot of squids, but you're going to eat that fish and that deep sea shrimp too if you find them, because you eat what you can get down there. Can't be, no picky eaters. So, Skelly, let me know if there's more questions.
Do you know off the top of your head how long the elephant seal can hold its breath? That might be something that is easily Googleable, but
yeah, it's they usually die for only 20 minutes, so much shorter. Than the 2 cetaceans. So, but they can go. Look how deep they can go in those 20 minutes. So, pretty cool. So let's see. One thing I wanted to say, Miranda mentioned that there are, some of these submersibles have seen plastic down there in the ocean. And so I want everybody to leave with the thought, thinking, this is the most remote, this is life on the edge. When you live on the edge, the littlest thing can push you over the edge, right? So from survival to not surviving. So if we can all do our part, use less plastic if we can, make sure that if you do use the plastic, that it's disposed of properly and doesn't drift or make its way into the ocean. But sometimes that you have no control over that, right? Maybe it's down the chain somewhere. So if we can avoid using plastic, of course, that is the best thing we can do. And just remember, protect our oceans, advocate for them, tell people about them. Let's try and keep these amazing, wonderful places safe. So.
Very true. And one more question. We had a participant text in a question. Are there any animals at the true bottom of the ocean? And I think maybe we covered some of these earlier.
Yeah. So I think, that at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, that is the deepest part of the ocean. You do have the amphipods and the snailfish, and I think the ratfish that Miranda mentioned at the beginning as well. So there's not a whole lot down there. But again, I really want to emphasize we're peeking into the depths here. We don't know, we're not, it's so difficult to spend a lot of time. It's so expensive to send these machines down there. There could be more. So if that's something that you are interested in, maybe you can be the one who finds these answers.
All right. I think that's all the questions we have.
Oh, well, thank you everyone so much. It's been a pleasure talking about these animals with you. If you do have more questions, we can put our emails in the YouTube chat and feel free to reach out to us. We love talking about all these things. So have a wonderful day.
And we are going to post in the chat the next natural sciences classroom is going to be captivating carnivores, which is about carnivorous plants. So it's going to be very, very cool. So come and learn about carnivorous plants. And I'm putting that link so you can learn more about it on our website. And thank you guys again so much for joining us. We are so excited to see you for other programs.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your week.